Thanks for checking out this video. We're going to have an introductory look at string builders in C#. So if you're relatively new to C# and working with strings and you haven't even heard about string builders, or maybe you have and you're not really sure when and why you should use them, this video is for you. I won't bore you too much with an intro, so let's jump right over to the code and see how these things work. So I have a new project here in Visual Studio, and what I'm going to be demonstrating is why we would want to use a string builder. So let's start out with a simple example. And we're going to define our string here. So I'm just going to declare a new string variable. We'll call it my string, and we'll just initialize it to be empty. All right, so you may have some code, and depending on what you're trying to build, where you're trying to add a bunch of stuff to this string. So for example, you want to be looping through things and adding more content to the string, and you might have a loop structure where you might say while true, and you're trying to do some type of work, and you want to be basically doing something like my string plus equals, and then you're putting in some other text here, right? So this kind of thing going on. Obviously, this this example code, please don't go run this. This will just be an infinite loop. But this general structure where you have a loop, you're trying to concatenate the string, and just basically adding more content to it. So some examples of this kind of stuff might be if you're trying to build up an HTML document, or maybe you're trying to format some JSON or some XML, and you find that you're adding a bunch of strings together. It may not look exactly like some type of loop structure. It might look like you have some other strings. So maybe you have string my big string 1, and this is going to be assigned to something that is very large. So let's just pretend this goes on for, thank you, autocomplete, thousands of characters. So this string is really big, and you might have another string that's really big. So we have a second one here, and you might go, well, cool, I want my string to be equal to these two things. And depending on what your application's doing, if you have something really simple, this might be totally okay. The reason that I want to talk about this is when you should be looking at using a string builder. Now, a string builder, let's declare one of those. So string builder, my string builder. Cool. So we have a new one of these, and what you're able to do is basically build up the string as it might suggest, and then we can get the output of that. So we can say my string is going to be equal to my string builder to string. Where I have this comment right here is actually where we would be putting in the other pieces to this string builder and then calling toString on it. So to replace this example that I have highlighted, it might look something like my string builder dot append. This autocomplete is using Copilot now, and it's getting a little bit too crazy for my liking, so I probably should have disabled it, but please bear with me. So this is functionally equivalent to what's on line 8 here. The difference is that when we're doing this kind of thing and adding the strings together, this might not be a good example. You might want to consider like adding more things to it. Essentially what's happening is that there's a lot of string copying going on. There's a lot of allocations when you have to concatenate strings together. The string builder class is basically behind the scenes going to do this a lot more effectively for you. So instead of having lots of little allocations along the way, you end up getting one string created right at the end when you do this toString call. So this particular example may not be a great way to demonstrate it. The loop example, or thinking about building up, some large XML file, some JSON file, something that's going to have a lot of text in it, and you have to keep appending small pieces to it. Something like a string builder is going to be very beneficial for you. And you'll notice that not only you're going to have less allocations, you'll probably notice the performance of your application increases. This will depend. If you find like you have a really simple application, maybe you're jamming two big strings together and whatever, you don't care about performance just because it's so simple. This kind of thing on line 8, that might be totally fine for you. So when I talk about these types of things, I don't want to tell you like it's a rule that if you have, two or more strings over X length, you must use a string builder. No, like you don't have to. If you have a really simple app, do what you got to do. But I wanted to demonstrate to you that if you're using a string builder and you are putting long strings together and appending them, then doing something like this will be more effective than what you see on line 8. So as you're building more complex applications and trying to get a little bit more performance out of them, I do recommend that you start considering, when you have scenarios like this, that you're looking at a string builder maybe to replace that. So just a super short video to touch on why you might want to use string builders. Again, just to quickly recap, when you're putting a lot of strings together and appending them, whether it's small pieces one at a time, or you're putting a bunch of big strings together to try and make something even bigger, perhaps like a document, XML, HTML, JSON, something like that, you may have a lot of allocations. You're going to be probably experiencing a bit of slowdown depending on what you're doing. And if you compare that with a string builder, it will be able to do that a lot more effectively for you. So just something to keep in mind, and keep that in your toolbox as you're programming. Thanks for watching, and if you enjoyed this video, then you're going to want to watch these ones right after.